Good evening. I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our vital Black Enterprise Town Hall, Decision 2024, Why We Must Ensure Black Voter Engagement, hosted by the Executive Leadership Council, the preeminent organization of Black senior executives across the globe. We have a few weeks before it will be time for us to go to the polls and decide on the next President of the United States. In fact, I strongly believe that this act will prove to be the most important decision that you will make this year: the election of Vice President Kamala Harris versus President Donald Trump. It is the decision between a leader who seeks to create a nation that promotes opportunity and a former president who seeks to turn back the clock. That's why we are holding this town hall this evening, because it is imperative that all African Americans participate in the political process to make sure that our voices are heard, and just as important, that we preserve and protect our franchise. For instance, we continue to confront barriers at the ballot box, from the imposition of stricter voter ID laws, voter registration restrictions, and continued purging of voter rolls. As we look at the current state of the electorate, even at this point, we still have large numbers of undecideds, and unfortunately, in too many cases, apathetic voters. We cannot afford for any registered voter to sit on the sideline. That's why, regardless of your political leaning, we have assembled an esteemed panel to fully discuss the need to significantly bolster Black voter participation, not only in the presidential election, but share the significance of our engagement in congressional, U.S. Senate, statewide, and local races as well. We want you to take this opportunity to gain a clear understanding of the impact of this election cycle, as well as your continued engagement in the political process. It will determine your financial standing, equal access to opportunity, equal rights, and overall quality of life. Now we will hear a special message from our friends at the Executive Leadership Council. Please welcome Michael Hyder, its President and CEO. Michael?
Thank you, Butch. I want to begin by thanking Black Enterprise for hosting this important town hall and for providing a platform to discuss one of the most critical issues of our time, voter engagement. As we stand at the crossroads of a pivotal election season, the stakes are incredibly high, particularly for Black communities and the issues that directly impact us. From the Executive Leadership Council's perspective, our mission is centered around advancing Black executives and driving economic and leadership opportunities. But we recognize that none of this happens in a vacuum. Our work in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot succeed without strong, engaged communities behind it. While our organization remains nonpartisan, the role of government policy and legislation in supporting or conversely undermining DE&I initiatives cannot be ignored. Decisions made by elected officials, whether they relate to healthcare, education, or the workplace, shape environments in which Black professionals and communities operate. These decisions have long-lasting consequences for our ability to build inclusive and equitable spaces where all people, regardless of background, can thrive. At this critical moment, we must ask ourselves, how can we move forward if our voices aren't heard at the ballot box? Black voter engagement is not just about participating in an election. It's about ensuring that the progress we've made toward equity doesn't unravel. DE&I efforts are at a particularly vulnerable point. Legislative trends, whether at the federal or state levels, can either bolster or dismantle initiatives aimed at increasing representation, closing racial wealth gaps, and ensuring that corporations commit to inclusive practices. Your vote has the power to support leaders and policies that reflect our values of fairness, opportunity, and equal access for all. So I urge you to recognize that your vote carries weight, not just for today, but for the future of Black economic and professional empowerment. We must all remain vigilant, informed, and engaged, making sure that we support the policies and leaders who will continue to move the needle on DE&I and uplift our communities. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today. Together, through engagement, we can ensure that progress is not only maintained, but accelerated. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Derek T. Dingle, Chief Content Officer for Black Enterprise. Welcome to tonight's Town Hall Decision 2024, Why We Must Ensure Black Voter Engagement, hosted by the Executive Leadership Council. In a few weeks, America will go to the polls to elect the next president of the United States. We will find out whether it will be Vice President Kamala Harris or former President Donald Trump. To discuss these critical issues, we will hear from our dynamic panel. It includes Mark Morial, President and CEO for the National Urban League, Melanie Campbell, President and CEO for the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, and Andrew Gillum, a former politician and one of the hosts of Native Land Pod, which explores cultural and political issues. Now, let's begin our conversation. First question is, what is at stake for African Americans during this election cycle?
I'm going to steal something from the guys. I think we're in the fourth quarter.
Okay.
It's on now. We've gone through the first, second, third quarter. We're in the fourth quarter of this race, and where we are is where the rubber meets the road. You know, we're at this point now where there has been a surge of voter registration. So one of the biggest things I think that we have to do is make sure those new voters who are excited about this election that weren't excited 30 days ago, a little over 30 days ago, especially young people who are registering organically in large numbers. The biggest challenge for new voters is that many times they may register, but a lot of times people have a lot of fear about voting. So we have to make sure that they have the information that they need to make sure that they maximize that power they now have in their hands with that ballot. So that's one thing, is to really make sure that we get the voter education, giving them information on where to go vote. The biggest problem that people have is they may sometimes show up in the wrong polling place because the polling place has moved. It's like the mechanics of voting. So for us, it's really like what we call, are you vote ready? Like making sure people check their voter registration status, because in some places being purged, like states like Georgia, and make sure they know they can early vote, if they want to absentee vote or vote on election day. So it's like really the mechanics of it and giving people good information to utilize that power of that ballot is part of what we're focused on.
So it's at this point, being prepared, having the information so that you can act. Mm-hmm. So Mark, in terms of from your vantage point, what are your views in terms of where we are? Because when you look at the Black vote, it's not a monolith. I mean, when you look at it generationally, we have young Gen Z voters, we have baby boomers, Gen Xers. Each of them come with, and millennials, each come with their own perspectives, each come with their own engagement in the voting process. How do we make sure, as Melanie talked about, we keep that momentum going, that we engage, especially the young voters, because, depending on the surveys that you look at, there is, talk about, whether they're fully engaged or whether they're going to, stay on the sidelines, to carry that, football analogy further.
Well, Derek, thank you for having me, and Andrew and Melanie. It's an honor to be with you, and certainly, as I said earlier, in the spirit of the legend Earl Graves, founder and visionary behind Black Enterprise. Melanie's right. We are in the fourth quarter. Issue has been joined. This is a highly competitive election, very tight, especially in those so-called swing states, which will make the difference because the Electoral College is this sort of quirk of American democracy. I don't particularly like it, but we're stuck with it, and we've got to navigate around it. The Urban League movement is fired up. The Urban League members and young professionals are fired up. And our campaign, Reclaim Your Vote, is working in 6 states and 15 to 18 communities to educate and register, educate, and mobilize. So here's the most important thing, and it's apropos to something Melanie just suggested. Everyone needs a voting plan. Where will you vote? In some states, you can vote by mail. In some states, you can vote early. In some states, you cannot vote by mail nor vote early. You must show up to the polling place on election day. Know what your options are and decide now which of those options you're going to take advantage of. Now, many states have voter ID requirements. They become very prescriptive. Some states, some forms of ID do not work. If you have a voting plan, you want to know exactly what you need, when you will vote. And then thirdly, as Melanie suggested, polling place relocations are part of the suppression game in many counties and states. And in the southern states, where all 3 of us, Melanie, Andrew, and I, we're all from, they're from Florida, I'm from Louisiana. Those states used to be covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which meant if they were going to relocate a polling place, they needed to get it approved by the Department of Justice. All of that was disabled. The plug was pulled on that by the Supreme Court in 2013 in the Shelby case. What is the bottom line? Have a voting plan. And number 2, know the stakes in this election. There's a big difference between the direction that these candidates want to take the country. And it ain't about who gave you a check, because nobody gave you nothing, because it was taxpayer money, right? And know the stakes. Who has a better plan to protect our vote and pass a new Voting Rights Act? Who is going to make sure civil rights laws are enforced? Who's going to have an economy that's going to be for working and middle-class folks and those aspiring, those in our community who may be in poverty and near poverty or aspiring to the middle class? Who's got a plan for that? Project 2025, last point. The tax chapter of Project 2025 envisions tripling the tax rates for all Americans who earn under $75,000 a year. Now, the median income in Black America is probably somewhere in the 40, maybe up to 50, 45, 47, 50. So probably 2/3 of Black Americans would be subjected under the 45 tax plan, the 2025 tax plan, to a tripling of their taxes. This, I'm saying, know the record, not the rhetoric. We need to be educated and have a voting plan. That's a message we're going to be carrying through all the way till November.
Thank you for that, Mark. You talk about the voter suppression aspect, and I'm going to ask you, and then ask Andrew and have Melanie also join in this. Do the voters know what they need to do if they are confronted with an act of suppression or voter intimidation? Do they know that there's steps that they need to take to protect their franchise as they're, at the polls? So, Mark, I'll have you.
Let me just say, I think we have a lot to do to educate people. In some places, you have a right to cast a provisional ballot. In every instance, we are asking people to immediately pick up their phone, go to 1-866-OUR-VOTE, and report any suppression they experience, they see, or they're told about to the 1-866-OUR-VOTE hotline, which is staffed by lawyers who are knowledgeable and who can take action in some cases immediately. 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's a combined, certainly run by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, but something embraced by the entire civil rights and voting rights community.
Okay. Andrew, on Native Land Pod, what advice are you giving related to, the blocking of people trying to vote? What advice do you provide them? What can organizations and grassroots organizations specifically do to make sure that people are prepared on election day, and even just as important, in early voting?
Yeah. Thank you, Derek. And of course, it is good to be with Mark and Melanie, my friends and mentors in this work. I will tell you that the most important thing that I think any of us can really put our shoulder to the wheel of now is helping to make sure that every voter feels confident about their ability to go to the ballot box, cast their vote and have that vote counted. Knowing your rights on this thing is practically everything. I know one thing. I know that I'm a registered voter. I have practiced the franchise multiple times, actually every time since I turned 18. And I couldn't go to a polling place and suffer having anybody tell me that I'm not on a roll or that I can't vote. But there are people who can expect to be confronted by those kinds of challenges when they show up in some of our states, particularly when you consider states like Georgia, where the state elections board is going out of its way to create new rules and new hurdles to keep people from exercising the franchise. Donald Trump, one of the candidates for president, just the other day told folks at his rally that they didn't need to have to worry about voting. I mean, they've literally skipped past the concerns around folks voting and winning the most votes to taking this to a protest of the election before we've even had an opportunity to cast the first ballot. My real fears around this election are not about who will secure the majority of votes. I think I have a feeling about that, and I hope that feeling is right. My biggest concern, given what we've seen exampled by the United States Supreme Court, a willingness to thwart the Constitution of the United States, a willingness to, including through the Shelby v. Holder case, to take what is known as sort of settled law to cure what has been centuries of disregard for Black lives and the Black vote and all the fights that we had to endure to get to the point that we're at right now. Donald Trump's clarion call to go back to the days of yore signals something really important for Black voters, and that is we didn't do so well in the days of yore. We didn't do so well during a period of time where women weren't able to access the ballot box, where people of color weren't able to access the ballot box. That wasn't America. That was not in America that reflected the best of us. We're trying to inch ever so closer to the more perfect union, to make this union more perfect. We're inching there. And now you've got a whole clamorous effort to draw us backwards. And what's, I think, most insidious about it is using the law as a cudgel to have their way, regardless of who's on the other side of that or what law is on the other side of that fight. So I would just say to anyone who's listening who doesn't know yet what their rights are, if you get presented with the challenge that says you're not on the rolls, you say, give me a challenge ballot. In Florida, they're known, well, actually in many states, they're known, I think, routinely as a challenge ballot, where you say, give me a ballot that you can then cure after the polls have closed to ensure that I've gotten my right, that I have my fair right to vote. And once you've done that, you've done what you can. And it'll be left to organizations like Mark's and Melanie's and so many others to then do the fight within the courts to ensure that our votes get counted.
So is also technology a challenge as it relates to this election landscape?
I would, just from my perspective, and the others can speak for themselves, I'm not as concerned about the apparatuses used so much in the exercise of voting. I'm much more concerned about delay tactics to certification, efforts to disqualify individual voters by creating the atmosphere where an individual voter can go against another individual voter and say, I challenge that individual's right to vote. Like you were seeing in some states where it exists, that people can individually challenge, accost other voters and say, this person isn't a citizen. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. That kind of chaos really concerns me. And which is why I think the education piece is the most important, that folks feel in their power, within their right to exercise the right to vote, and that they don't go easily when given pushback to their abilities to vote freely.
And Derek, I would add something else to that, and I think Andrew's spot on in all of his comments with respect to concerns that we have and what a voter can do. And I think, Melanie, we probably have some work to do to maybe educate our people about provisional or challenge ballots so they know exactly what their rights are state by state. But here's something that has concerned me that we've written about in the State of Black America report, and that today there's a book out on this, and that is Russian interference through social media.
Yeah, I think that's real.
Interference has been focused on suppressing Black voters with these propaganda campaigns targeted at Black voters, targeted at young Black voters, targeted at young Black men, giving them excuses to not vote. Oh, they didn't do criminal justice reform. Oh, they didn't pass reparations. Oh, they didn't do this. They have done nothing. Just send a message, don't vote. That propaganda in 2016 worked. It helped the 45th president and it was very targeted.
Yeah.
And it was very pervasive.
Yeah.
That is what I'm concerned about, an assault of that kind of propaganda directed at our community in the final weeks of the election.
And Mark and Melody, it has, right? When we look at Janet Jackson repeating the talking points,
Janet Jackson,
one candidate in Russia.
Janet, I will say this. I'm disappointed in you, Janet. I'm not afraid to say it. Loyalty of our community. I just saw you perform at Essence. Loyalty of our community, our purchasing of your music has made you a very, very wealthy woman, right? And it's disappointing that you would trumpet these talking points.
And Mark, that's part of the threat that you're calling out, right? The fact that Russia in the other campaign is targeting messages toward people in such a way that even the well-heeled among us are falling prey to these. They're not alternative facts. They're not facts at all. They're simply lies.
Lies.
Since we have this moment, let's unpack this for our audience. And Melanie, I'd like you to touch on and break down from your vantage point the disinformation that's going out there that can have voters go in one direction because they're just uninformed or misinformed.
Well, let me say this. I see two entities on this in this town hall: Native Pod, Black Enterprise. Trusted messengers, trusted voices. The only way we're going to counter. Mark, Urban don't assume it's just young people, right? It's across generations problem. It's more pervasive because young people get their information more from social media, from digital sources. But the misinformation, when you talk about Janet Jackson, she's over 50 years old. She's not a kid, right? She's got a kid. So making sure that we use trusted voices like you all of us, we have to do the hard work where people get their information, where they trust. The trusted sources, voices have to be louder because there's no way through technology that we can stop a lot of this. But majority of bad information is going to get out there. So it's really about giving people the information now And so one of the things is that we have something called give people 7 things you need to know. Andrew, we've been doing that since the 2000 election when they stole it, right? That was a real theft, if you want to know the truth, right? We know what theft looks like. Go to 2000 Florida, right? And the Supreme Court when they took the election. But being able to get that information, the kinds of things people need to know, they can go to our unitycampaign.org site. There's 7 things people need to know, right? You got to verify your registration, verify and know where you're supposed to go vote, verify and know. We say empower yourself, and we used to say you want to inoculate yourself. It's like getting a vaccine. Put that information in to know how to make sure that you don't lose the opportunity for your vote to cast that vote, but to have that vote counted. And some people say, well, you know, if you talk about that, people aren't going to be able to. Mark, we talk about this all the time. Bad information gets repeated. We got to get the good factual information out there. I don't care how many times people hear it. If you hear enough, you're going to hold on to that. And that 186-hour vote number, that is like the last resort. If we give people the information now and they know where to go vote, they know how to vote, that information is important. And being able to counter the bad information. You know, many of us, I mean, at one point I started taking leave of absence, but Mark wouldn't let me. I didn't really say what I want to say, but I got to keep my C3 job over here. But the truth of the matter is we have to all be out here going 90 going north against that, because then that'll help, but it won't be the only, it won't solve all the problems. But I always, you know, say to young people, if they didn't care, they wouldn't be going out their way to make sure that you don't get that vote counted. You have the power, because people gravitate to understanding they have power. People run away when they think they don't have any power. Right. If they what they're doing in Georgia as an example of what they're trying to do with making it harder that they can come back later and counter is to suppress the vote. Because what happens is people say, well, it's not going to matter. They're going to take it anyway. We have to show up. We got to walk to the polls, stroll to the polls, dance, second line mark to the polls, every aspect, the Divine Nine showing up, Black Enterprise, mobilizer. We have to show up and overperform because we know what the deal is. They're trying to steal this doggone election from our and boldly in our faces, and we're better than that. We're more organized than that. And so that's what I know. We got to show up and show out. That's what happened. Look, after 2008, when folks freaked out that this Black man got elected, and we had to overperform in 2012 for Barack Obama to get reelected, right? We weren't the only ones. Everybody underperformed in 2016. But the reality is that case that Mark talked about with 2013, that Supreme Court case, it had a residual effect on turnout. But in the midst of a pandemic, we showed up and showed out and overperformed. Young people never got the credit for what they did in 2020 and 2018 when we were fighting back against the suppressive regime of the Trump administration. I think Mark's a lawyer. Check me. I can say that, right?
Yep.
It's a fact. You know, I'm nonpartisan, but it's a fact. And so we're at this point again. And this time it's for keeps. When you have a candidate that's going to tell you that you don't have to vote again because I got you, or telling women I'm going to take care of you when you are let me just pull it back. When your history tells us that you are a sexist and you are a racist. So we got to give our people the facts, let them make their own decisions. We are not a monolith, but this is not just about whether a Republican or a Democrat, right, gets in office. It's whether or not this system is going to be dismantled before our very eyes. Black people, we got to do what we got to do. We got to show up and show out.
We got to do what we got to do. We got to vote, and we got to vote, and we got to vote with a vengeance and with passion. And I will certainly add this. You said this, you shared this earlier. We do have a very diverse and dynamic Black America. Mm-hmm. You know, we have many generations. We have gender and gender identity. We have the community is a big, messy family. My family's messy. Your family's messy. All our family's messy. You know, I say that with great love. But what should unite us is the idea that we have to protect our rights, protect our dignity, protect our integrity, and not allow people who insult us and people who diminish us and people who trash us and people who don't ever give us an opportunity. I'll say this in my personal capacity. Mr. Trump never had a Black executive in the Trump organization. Mr. Trump never had a Black executive as a member of his leadership team within his campaign. Mr. Trump did not appoint many Black judges. He certainly appointed very few Black male judges. Let's get the record versus the rhetoric. So I'm telling people, go side by side on what these candidates stand for and make an intelligent choice. And I believe our community is poised to show up, poised to do what it must do. And we have power because whether it's Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Virginia or North Carolina or Georgia or Arizona and Nevada, we have significant communities that can make the difference. These elections are decided on narrow margins in a handful of states. We have to do our job and we have to be prepared. And we have to be prepared for nefarious activities and, suppression and integrity violations by people who will not be happy with the outcome of the election. So we got work to do. But I think Melanie has been a champion. Andrew, I like what you all are doing now with the radio and the podcast and that kind of communication, because we need all voices out there.
Real.
Yeah. All voices who are offering our community serious analysis, guidance, and dialogue. And that's what tonight is all about. So it's a big thanks to Black Enterprise again. I just always love what Black Enterprise does and stands for and continues to hold that flag for the best interests of Black America.
As you said, Mark and Melanie, Andrew, this is a galvanizing moment, we're a little bit over a month before the election. All those galvanizing forces need to come together to combat the disinformation and what have you, and to get the communications out. What I have to ask you, Andrew, is in terms of creating that structure, that apparatus, that co-joining of organizations and the grassroots efforts, shouldn't that communication also be focused? Presidential election obviously is extremely important. But what about the congressional races? What about the down ballot races? What needs to be done there in terms of education and galvanizing Black voters, across generational lines and, across, communities? And we're talking about not only, battleground states, but we're talking about states throughout the nation.
That's exactly right. You're right. I often get a little scared when I hear us zeroing in on the battlegrounds in these conversations, even though it's important to note them, because I want folks to know that they are not all. If you're in a state outside of those that are name checked, doesn't get off the hook from voting. We still have to show it. We still have to participate because the Congress is still made up of 435 members of the U.S. House and 100 members of the U.S. Senate, and they come from all the states and congressional districts around the country. And what is absolutely certain is if the Democrat or the Republican were to prevail this November, they're going to need a cooperating House and Senate in order to move an affirmative agenda. Now, a lot obviously can happen administratively with a bad president or a good president. We know that certainly post the Supreme Court decision on Trump, that the executive is a pretty powerful place to sit. But by and large, you can't move wholesale pieces of legislation. We can't go back and revisit the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. which would hopefully reestablish the contours of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which did protect so many of us in the South, where the agenda to roll back our vote and our access to it is so aggressive. They don't even hide it anymore. It is in plain sight, if you will, that their intentions. When you have a governor like the one that exists in Florida that is sending the state's law enforcement agency to the doorsteps of people who signed a petition around a woman's reproductive health decisions, they're sending law enforcement officers to the doors to say, hey, are you the one who signed this? Is there fraud going on? What was your motivation? You know, these kinds of questions, which none of us would believe could exist in a democratic society today, that a one strongman governor or one strongman president could use the apparatus of that office to go out and virtually intimidate voters, to keep them from accessing the ballot box. It's almost, what should be stark for everyone about the time that we right now exist is that I believe this may be the first time in American history where we've seen a regression of rights of people. Every generation has advanced rights. They have advanced people's access. They've advanced equality. And we sit at a time where now rights for individuals are being constricted, are being taken away. And so voting like our lives depend on it almost doesn't even hit the point. I almost want people to just vote in their own self-interest. Just vote if it is in your interest for the government to put a tax on all goods that are shipped into the United States to the tune of a 10% tax, which I don't know, Mark, you deal with more corporations than I do, but I don't know one of them who is generous enough to absorb that expense rather than passing that on to the customer.
If you take that idea, a 10% tariff, which functions as a tax. So if you own anything, this suit may have been made someplace else, I'm not even sure, it would be 10% more. Food items that may be avocados from Mexico, for example, clothing from Africa, oil from the Middle East, 10% tariff. And if you take that plus this absurd and medieval and Gestapo plan to deport all immigrants, you're talking about economic devastation for the United States of America.
All economists across the board saying the same thing.
And every responsible economist, even conservative economists. I mean, I call it, the plan is Fortress America. Let's just kick out all the immigrants, close off all the imports, build a wall around the country, and somehow we can exist. That is not the world today. That is not the United States of America. And we have to lift up a coalition of the willing. These policies are on the ballot.
That's right.
And we have to recognize the work we need to do.
I just want to get final comments from each of you in terms of the election, what we need to do, and the countdown for the next several weeks to get people to the polls, to get people galvanized, to get out the vote.
Mark, you want to say a word?
I'll go first so I can. Everyone needs to have a voting plan. Put your plan down, take out your phone or take out a pen, whatever you choose, a phone, and put down your plan. I'm going to vote on XYZ day at XYZ time at XYZ place.
Yep.
I'm going to vote by mail. I'm going to vote early. I'm going to vote. I'm going to take my brother to work, my mother to work, my mother to the poll, my brother to the poll, my cousin to the poll, my grandmother to the poll. I'm going to the poll with my special person. We all need a plan. Yeah. And that's what I want to leave everyone with. Let's make sure we do everything we must do. Have a plan, and let's vote with a vengeance and with passion and with purpose.
Melanie, can you share your comments, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much again. This was really invigorating, right? To be on here with you all tonight. Well, at the end of the day, it's all about the power of the ballot. Our rights, our freedoms, this very democracy is on the ballot. What's on the ballot for Black women is controlling our bodily autonomy. What's on the ballot for young people to be able to be educated in a way that you can have celebrate your history is on the ballot. For Black men, it's about whether or not you will be able to live out your economic dreams, right? In this country, whether or not Black people, period, will be able to be protected from bad policing. All these things, so many things are on the ballot, and the structure matters. People say, well, what is democracy about? It's about the freedom, right? Or opportunity to have freedom and economic opportunity in this country. That's what's on the ballot. And so take that ballot and know you have the power, no matter what station in life you are. Though everybody on election day or early voting even now has that same opportunity, and we don't want to let that be taken away by being bamboozled. So own it, own that power, use it. It's in our hands. The freedom and justice is on the ballot. Let's get it done.
That's real.
Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah, simply close one. Melanie, always good to be with you as well. And I'm thankful to Black Enterprise for prioritizing this as we close in on Election Day. And in truth, yes, we are in the fourth quarter and approaching the end of it. But in politics, it is also 30 days plus of a lifetime for the candidates and those campaigns, where any number of things are going to be thrown at one to the other as a way to upset the race. And what I would just encourage people to do is to, frankly, ignore the noise and to really deepen into the fact that we got one job. They say, what's a Black job? Well, our Black job between now and Election Day is going to be to vote. Is going to be able to find our way to an early voting place or on Election Day, cast that ballot and do everything we can to ensure that it's done. And I would only add one more ask on top of that, and that is when you're going, bring 5 people with you. Make yourself individually, personally accountable for arriving with 5. If they don't physically show up with you, you've got your phone tree and you're calling from the beginning of the day until the end of the day, the precinct's closed, to find out whether or not that person you've taken responsibility for has gone and cast their ballot. I don't care what any celebrity, athlete, actress, actor has to say. The most influential person when it comes to the voting process, the most trusted figure, is the one that you can reach out and touch. The person you know, the person that folks have established that you're a legitimate voice. And you are the right person to then hold your 5 accountable. So vote yes, but also arrive with 5.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank all of you for your contributions to this conversation, to moving the needle forward in terms of the political process. And as you said, we need to get the word out, we need to galvanize, and we need to vote.
That's right.
And this is not the end, this is the beginning.
That's right.
Of moving us as people forward and this nation as a whole forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for tonight's Black Enterprise Town Hall on Decision 2024, Why We Must Ensure Black Voter Engagement, hosted by the Executive Leadership Council. We hope that you've gained valuable information and insights from this virtual experience. We are certain this session will help you learn more about the critical issues and make your decision at the polls on November 5th. We would like to thank our esteemed panelists, Mark Marial, Melanie Campbell, and Andrew Gillum, for their impactful conversation and valuable insights. We would also like to extend our deep appreciation to our sponsor, the Executive Leadership Council, for its role in producing tonight's program, including the compelling comments from its president and CEO, Michael Hyder. Remember, you and others can engage in on-demand viewings of this session on blackenterprise.com, and we encourage you to share your thoughts and comments on our social media channels using hashtag #BETownHall. Black Enterprise is a leading digital Black media brand, and as such, we present content offerings to enhance your business and financial lives. However, to further our advancement on all fronts, we must act now. Be on the lookout for our upcoming live event, Black Men Excel Summit, hosted by FedEx at the JW Marriott Miami Turnberry Resort and Spa in Aventura, Florida, from November 6th to November 8th. Next, we will hold our Black Enterprise Be Smart Hackathon, the much anticipated competition of innovators from our leading HBCUs. For the first time, it will be held in Charlotte, North Carolina from November 14th to the 17th. For more information on our future events and town hall sessions, go to Black Enterprise/events. As we close, we encourage all of you to vote on November 5th. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.